Good day, Industrial Advisor listeners, and thank you for tuning in. If you have not subscribed, please do so by clicking subscribe wherever you podcast. Click the like button and hit the bell if you want notifications of when we put up new content. Leave us a comment about anything we discuss here today or general comments about the show. Now, let's get into it.
Welcome to our Industrial Advisors podcast. You have Bill Condon and Matt McGregor, and we have a fantastic guest with us. Really feel great about having Jon Scholes here. Jon is the president and CEO of the Downtown Seattle Association with over, I think, 1,100 members now, a part of the DSA. And I would say, Jon, your kind of main responsibility is to create a downtown that's vibrant and welcoming for a variety of different groups, but really kind of having downtown Seattle be at its peak at all times.
Yeah, our mission is to create a healthy, vibrant downtown for all. So you almost just nailed it exactly. And we've been doing that work since 1958.
Awesome. Well, appreciate you joining us. I've heard you speak at a variety of different industry events, and I told Sydney the other day, I was like, we got to get Jon on our podcast. So really appreciate you taking the time. Let's start maybe with the current state of downtown and how you feel the current state of downtown is operating in today's environment.
Well, it's a story of a good amount of progress over the last 2 years. And, under the leadership of Mayor Harrell and others in the private sector investing, I think we've made an incredible amount of progress relative to where we were in the depths of the pandemic when you had, 500 ground floor closures and plywood and graffiti everywhere and the streets and sidewalks deserted. That's not the case today. Today, we've got more people living downtown than we had pre-pandemic, about 106,000 people calling downtown home. In the area, Seattle Center down to T-Mobile and First Hill to the water. And 7,200 units of residential under construction, more than any peer downtown west of Chicago. So a real strong story around residential growth. And we lost a number of residents during COVID, folks who moved out and went elsewhere, but we recovered there and now have a record number of people living downtown. Return to office has been slower than we'd like, and that story's been well told, but we're continuing to see progress in the right direction. We're at about 55% of folks relative to this time in 2019 spending 3 or more days a week in their office. And then the visitor industry, particularly in the summer, which is now May to October because of the cruise season that really anchors our visitor season. The visitor industry is generally back to where it was in 2019 over the summer months. It's a little softer in the fall and winter and early spring, but the mix of leisure, cruise, convention, some amount of business travel in those summer months, and then all those big events that we're seeing now, from concerts to Kraken games to other sporting events in baseball, and having Climate Pledge Arena hosting 80 or so concerts in addition to the games a year. That wasn't taking place before it was open. So there's a lot of action and energy there that are drawing visitors back to our city.
Yeah, the All-Star game was fantastic. That was a great weekend.
Yeah,
Seattle
great 3-4 days in the city.
We got the World Cup coming up, so that'll be cool in 2026. So lots of good things. Buddy of mine just opened up a restaurant called Messina right by the Kraken.
Good timing.
Oh, yeah. They're great restaurant, by the way. Fantastic. Anyway, they're doing really well, and a lot of that has to do with all that energy around that area.
Yeah, Climate Pledge, they just did a phenomenal job of delivering that arena to our city during a pandemic. Mm-hmm. It's a great addition to the campus, great addition to the city. It's a great fan experience and a great experience for folks going to see concerts as well. The AV, the acoustics in there. I mean, it's a top 3 arena in the country and a big economic driver for that part of downtown.
It's great. My wife and I just got season tickets to Kraken, and I will tell you the ease of getting in and out of there, like the Mercer mess is gone, all of that. It's, I grew up here, so getting out of the old Sonics games when you were a kid was like an hour on Mercer alone, right? It's so easy.
Yeah, I remember, really Denny being backed up, Mercer being backed up, going to Sonic games as well. And they've done a masterful job of making it easy for people to get in and out of there and creating lots of options. And the work they did to improve the monorail and embed a monorail ticket in your game ticket and all of that has been great.
Yeah,
that's right. Well, Jon, you mentioned the pandemic. Tell us a little bit about how the city responded and how you feel the city responded versus other cities, and kind of in the depths of it, like, we hear different statistics, but how many businesses went down, during the pandemic, and what has been a little bit of the recovery?
Yeah, as we all remember, I mean, downtown Seattle was the first North American downtown to feel the effects of the pandemic. When we had that first case in Kirkland, we had employers, I think, what was it, March 5th of 2020, that collectively made decisions to send all their folks home that were working in offices. And that was, after a series of conversations with public health leaders and the mayor and governor and county executive and others. So this place got quiet real fast.
That's right.
When tens of thousands of employees weren't coming in. And then we saw the events that started to get canceled, and then, restrictions on other types of gathering and restaurant closures and all of that. So, we're not used to seeing the streets of downtown Seattle, the sidewalks, go vacant, go quiet. So it was a pretty grim time. And I think in a lot of ways there was sort of a penalty during the pandemic for the high-flying, dynamic downtowns, because we were used to seeing the vibrancy there. Places like Seattle and San Francisco, in Chicago, you're not used to seeing those places quiet. And so the higher you were flying, I think, as a downtown, the further you had to fall. And we had, a lot of tough months and tough years there of empty streets and tent encampments and plywood and riots and a lot of chaos. And in some ways, felt a bit abandoned downtown. There wasn't a lot of accountability for bad behavior, shall we say. But those days are largely behind us. Again, I think under the mayor's leadership and what he's been focused on, we've got many fewer tents on the sidewalks. I think maybe 10 today in the greater downtown. We had 150 in January of 2021.
Okay.
We still have people suffering and in need, and we still face some challenges around folks that are homeless and folks that are, dealing with drug addiction. But we don't have the chaos that we had in, 2020, 2021. In our downtown. So much is reopened. We've got more new businesses than businesses that are closing. Our arts and cultural venues are open. We're continuing to see investment. And we've got a good mix here. We've never been oversubscribed to one sector or another. We've got arts and culture and sports, and our stadiums and our arenas are close to our downtown and tucked into the urban core. We've got cruise business. We've got people living downtown. And that, to me, is the recipe for a successful downtown post-pandemic. It's not being oversubscribed to one sector. It's being having a great mix and lots of reasons for people to be here throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the seasons.
How many cruise ships hit Seattle on an annual basis?
Oh, man. Well, we had a record last year, record the year before. I can't remember the exact number of callings, but this is an industry that has grown from a handful of cruise ships in the late 90s when they first started coming to Seattle to well over 100 today. Again, really between April and October. And those are folks that come a day or two before or stay a day or two later after their cruise, takes off for Alaska, returns back to Seattle. So there's a lot of economic activity and spending in hotels and bars and restaurants and other events that our city benefits from.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it has been great to see the rebounds from the pandemic. Matt and I are both Seattle guys, right? Born and raised, and we've seen the city kind of grow up, right? Where do you, as you look at kind of downtown Seattle today and that greater Seattle area, where do you see growth opportunities moving forward for downtown?
Well, we still have, areas that we can develop. We still have, office sites. We still have residential sites. We'll see some, I think, office to residential conversion. I think office to education conversion is an interesting place to look of, public school downtown, community college, workforce development and training. Northeastern University had this quiet little presence 10 years ago in South Lake Union. And now I think it's got 100,000 square feet and a significant number of students, faculty, and staff. City University relocated, from Bellevue many years ago into the downtown. So I think education in the downtown, those uses that lots of people throughout our region want to be able to access, they can do it on transit, people coming from, all kinds of different places, leveraging the transit system that really is anchored and in the downtown. So putting uses that make sense for people to need to access from lots of different corners of our region. And we're building out this transit system with the largest transit program and light rail program in the country. And all those trains are leading to and from downtown Seattle. So I think we're going to continue to grow our residential density. People want to live in an urban place. And, lots of people during the pandemic, predicted otherwise, that our preferences were dramatically changed by the pandemic. And we wanted to spread ourselves out and have big houses and home offices and home theaters and all of that. And certainly there's plenty of people that do, but there's a good portion of the market that wants to live urban and wants walkability and proximity. And I think our downtown's well positioned to continue to grow its residential population, particularly with the massive waterfront project that's going to open really a year from now, which is going to be the phenomenal amenity and asset for residential. So residential education. I think Seattle's going to continue to, if we can ensure that this economic environment is a predictable one and competitive, we are going to continue to attract great businesses that want to be here or grow here, because we know lots of smart people want to continue to move here because of the incredible quality of life that we offer.
That's right. We obviously work here, live every day, and we're downtown every day, walk it every day. And I will say it's been a tremendous turnaround, mostly over this last year. What would you say, despite all the great things going on, what would you say still are the main challenges that you're faced with every day?
Well, this fentanyl crisis that continues to get worse. We had a record number of people in King County die from drug overdoses in 2023. Washington State led the nation in percent growth of overdose deaths among 50 states. So we had a 40% increase year over year.
Wow.
And we see a lot of that challenge and those impacts in downtown of open public sale and use of drugs. And it's a moral crisis, it's a health crisis. And in some ways it's an economic crisis, because I think it does affect people's desire to, go out to the show or go, shop or eat. And it impacts the cost of doing business. If you're a retailer or restaurateur that's operating a ground floor business and you have that kind of activity on your doorstep, it increases your security costs, it increases your staffing costs. So we've got to move with greater urgency to address this crisis. It's killing lots of people in our community, and there's lots of people, increasingly so, in vulnerable situations, people living outside, living in emergency shelters, that are the ones that are getting caught up in this emergency. Half the deaths in King County last year were folks living unsheltered in our community.
Yeah.
Wow. I feel like the mayor ran on a campaign of cleaning up Seattle, and he did it. Like, he did it really well. And you mentioned the 110 tenths down to 10 or so, or whatever it were. I feel like Seattle did a much better job than, say, San Francisco or Portland. Where did they go? Like, what did Seattle do with that?
Well, we opened up a lot of housing, and we had a number of major encampments in the downtown in 2020 and 2021. And through the leasing of hotels and a lot of services that were invested in, those folks were moved out of City Hall Park, off of the corner of First and Yesler. And, we had 40 tents on 3rd Avenue between Pike and Union for 5 or 6 months. You could barely walk down the sidewalk. So there was a lot of intensive outreach that moved those folks inside. So they weren't pushed to some other neighborhood in the city. They were brought inside, which is what we ought to be doing. And there's still, plenty of folks living outside in our city, and there's still plenty of tent encampments in other parts of the city, but there's a lot less in our downtown. We've got more work to do with the situation around 3rd Avenue and the intersection of the homelessness crisis with this drug crisis. And that's really, I think, the current emergency is the collision of these two emergencies of folks that are addicted to drugs and also outside. And those are the ones that are in the most vulnerable situation. But yeah, the mayor, I think, has had a clear agenda, and I think voters have a clear agenda of what they want to see. They believe the downtown needs to be healthy for the whole city to be healthy. There's a lot of voter support and strong sentiment for what the mayor's doing. And they want a city that's safe, and they want people that need help to get help.
That's right.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, being in this industry, you talk to other institutional owners, right? And they're talking about getting back to work and having people. You mentioned, I think, 55%. It's kind of we're back to about 55% of downtown offices being what they were prior to the pandemic. When we talk to our institutional clients, they seem to tell us, like in Chicago and New York, some of those markets, San Francisco, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday kind of appears to be back to the normal, let's get back to work, but Mondays and Fridays are still kind of quiet. When you talk to your peers in those other bigger cities, what are you hearing from them, and how do you guys interact to share best practices and ensure that you are doing everything you can to make sure that the downtowns are getting back to the most vibrant possible way?
Yeah, that Tuesday to Thursday pattern, I think, is generally the case across the country and in most downtowns. There's certainly downtowns in other regions of the country that are ahead of us as far as their return to office. And, if you reopened faster and you had less COVID restrictions and masking requirements and vaccine verification than other markets, and if you weren't so reliant on public transit to get commuters, workers between their homes and their jobs, you tended to have a greater increase in your return to office, or your pace of return was stronger. And Seattle's a place that, we had COVID restrictions in here, longer than most other markets around the country. And we rely on our public transit system to get a lot of people in and out of downtown for work. So, those were variables that were sort of working against us in returning people to the office. So There's certainly some, downtowns that are in the 65+%. There's not a lot in the 80+% as far as return to the office. And we're kind of along with our peers on the West Coast in a similar spot at 55 or so percent. But, I think we get closer to 2/3, maybe a little above that. I think it'll be interesting to watch how the spring and summer unfolds. And again, the workforce is not, static. And I think maybe we forget that in this debate about what's the future of work and where is this all going to settle out. We need to remember that the base of workers is constantly changing. So there's lots of young people that are taking their first job, and there's folks, retiring out of the workforce. So
Yeah.
I think there's a lot here to sort of shake out. And I still think the office is very relevant to work. And I think downtowns are relevant to work and connecting, because we offer lots of different kinds of places, including the office and a conference room, but also the restaurant and when you're doing the corporate dinner and, an event at the art museum. So the places that you want to connect with your team, with your colleagues, with your clients, often those are places in our downtown. So that's still very relevant to work and how we connect and support good culture and strategy and, customer relationships.
Yeah.
Last question for you. There's a lot of unique attributes about Seattle. What would you say is the main attractiveness to it for corporations and for people wanting to live downtown? And then the big question is, when are the Sonics coming back?
Yeah, the Sonics. Soon
Save
is
the
what
best for last.
soon is what Todd Leiwicki, the CEO of the Kraken, told me on my podcast. I had him on Seattle City Makers. We've been doing this for a couple of years. About a week ago, we were chatting, and I put that question to him, and he is pretty tapped into that world, and we've got an arena that's ready and a Seattle Center campus that's ready, and he said soon, so I like that answer, and I'll take his word out.
That's a great answer.
And then as far as I think what draws people here, what makes Seattle special, I mean, I think this mix of the big nature that we have, and we see it out your windows here of the Cascades and Olympics, and I mean, you can see 3 national parks from downtown Seattle. There's not a lot of downtowns that you can look out and see 3 national parks. And then we've got this great urban experience of arts and culture and sports and music. So you sort of have the best of all worlds here, which continues to draw smart college educated people to this town that then go create great things and economic opportunity for themselves and others. And I think that's been Seattle's secret sauce for some time. And I think the other aspect is, I think generally if you ended up here, you came back here, or you grew up here, you don't want to leave because of all those reasons. And you've got, you feel fortunate to be here. So you're committed to making it a better place. And I think for many, many decades, we've had civic and business leaders and leaders in the public sector too, that have really been committed to making this a better place. I think for themselves, there's some self-interest here certainly, but for their kids and the next generation. So it's not a pass-through town like maybe it once was. In the early years, it's a place that people want to come, they want to stay, or if they never left, they never want to leave, and they're committed to making it better. And I think that gives me a lot of optimism. I think our best days are ahead of us, recognizing we've been through some pretty tough ones the last couple of years.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal city. Obviously, we love it. You love it. It's been cool to watch the progress that you've been involved with and been able to really make over the past few years. And since you've been involved for however many years now with the DSA, Seattle's a great place. And to your point, I think only going to get better. So thank you for sharing your insights on downtown Seattle and everything around it. And love hearing the Sonics are hopefully coming back pretty soon.
Mm-hmm.
But I appreciate you spending time with us and joining our podcast. You
Thank
did
you
a great
very
job.
much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Appreciate
Yeah,
it.
thank you.